Scary Parrish, welcome back to the Eye on College Basketball Podcast on CBS Sports Network, where we sometimes discuss camel fighting, dodo birds, and leaky black. Matt Norlander is here with me, and we're going to be here for the next hour discussing some of the biggest topics in the sport. And why don't we start at the top of the rankings, specifically with Bruce Pearl's Auburn Tigers. They went to Alabama this past weekend. Alabama was ranked second in the AP poll. Auburn beat them, led basically from start to finish to improve to 23-2 overall, 11-1 in the SEC. They would be a unanimous number one in the AP poll right now, but one AP voter nonsensically gave a first-place vote to Florida like a dum-dum. So Auburn isn't actually unanimous number one, but the Tigers do have fewer losses than any other team in the top 25 and 6 more quadrant one victories than anybody else in the entire country. So Norlander, is it too early to call it, or are you ready to take Seth Davis's Sharpie, put it to paper, and insist there is no way anybody other than Auburn is going to be the number one overall seed in the 2025 NCAA tournament?
I wouldn't Sharpie this far out, but I do think the likelihood is north of 90%. And I do think, and this is rare, I mean, February 18th, I mean, I'm sharping. Auburn is a lock 1 seed. We're talking about whether it's a lock for the number 1 overall seed, which is a different conversation. It's a lock for a 1 seed. Like, it's not, there's no chance it drops off at this point. The resume metrics and the accomplishments, quad 1 victories are insane. I need just maybe 1 or 2 more wins, and then I'd go Sharpie for lock for number 1 overall. Now, that's different from me saying I believe it's going to happen. I do believe it's going to happen, but I'm allowing for the very, very narrow possibility that a Florida team that won at Auburn, and I guess that is the reason why that rogue voter put the Gators at number 1 this week, because the Gators did win by 9 in Auburn. But Florida, maybe Duke, those 2 teams, if they won out, could they jump Auburn if Auburn took like 3 or 4 losses? Conceivably, but I don't think that's going to happen.
Yeah, I'm with you. It's not Sharpie territory quite yet, because, Jemai Broome could sprain an ankle. Somebody else could, break a finger, and now you've got roster problems that in the toughest league in the country lead to you taking some losses. But barring something like that, simply put, Auburn's not going to lose enough, I don't think, to get passed by anybody. And so I'd bet a significant amount of money right now on Selection Sunday. We are talking about Bruce Pearl's Tigers as the number 1 overall seed in the bracket. And they are right now, either way, the favorite to win the 2025 NCAA tournament in the betting markets at plus 330. It hasn't always been them as the favorite. At one point, it was UConn. In recent weeks, it was Duke and Auburn as co-favorites, but Auburn has separated at least slightly away from the field, which means Bruce Pearl is now the favorite to win this season's national championship. Norlander, BP has already won a Division II championship at Southern Indiana. He did unprecedented things at Milwaukee, unprecedented things at Tennessee. He's done unprecedented things at Auburn and continues to do so. Do you have a sense for where Bruce Pearl would fit on like an all-time great list of college coaches if he were to see this thing through to the end and win the 2025 NCAA tournament?
Yeah, if he gets a national title, he's going to jump up significantly. I just wonder, and I wonder where he would land in that list right now. Like, right now, is Bruce Pearl, all-time history of men's Division I college basketball, is he one of the 40 best coaches? Like, right now, before a title? I mean, maybe. Now, some of the wins, again, Division I, he did have some winning at Southern Indiana before. Like, 231 of his wins came at the Division II level, which stacks to his record overall and his achievements. I'm not going to take that away from him. But you substitute those from his D1 record, and he's creeping up on almost 500 here. I think a title probably gets them to top 30 status. But I'm curious, like, and we don't have to litigate name by name, but I'm wondering where you would slot, broadly, vaguely speaking, Bruce Pearl. Again, Auburn's got to win it. So let's say they win it. Let's go hypothetical. Where does Bruce Pearl's title or his career stack up against these coaches? They all have one national championship. Scott Drew, Tony Bennett, John Calipari, Jim Boeheim, Tom Izzo, Lute Olson, Tubby Smith, Nolan Richardson, Jerry Tarkanian, Larry Brown, John Thompson Jr., Al McGuire, Rolly Massimino. These are really, really good coaches with incredible careers. All of them had one national title. So I think that he would be among the 30 to 40 best coaches in history with a title. But you really go over the long history of guys who have coached at the Division I level, and the list is deep. And you could certainly argue that he has built out a Hall of Fame resume if and when he can get that national title. But it's intriguing, GP, just to go and look at the guys who have even more wins, longer careers, like what Scott Drew did at Baylor. Pearl's done an amazing job at Auburn, but it doesn't stack up to the situation that Drew inherited at Baylor, and certainly we'll get to his team in the next segment here. I don't know. It was an interesting thought experiment to dive into, and I think that he will have a case for a Hall of Fame resume if and when he's to get a national title.
Just you going through that list of names of men who have won one national championship at the Division I level, without putting pen to paper, I would say he would clearly rank ahead of some of them and clearly rank behind some of them. He would be somewhere, I'd say, top half, but closer to the middle than the top and closer to the middle than the bottom. But again, I just sort of look at what you've accomplished relative to what other people who have had the same job accomplished. And he won a national championship at Southern Indiana. He did unprecedented things at Milwaukee. He did unprecedented things at Tennessee. And he has now done unprecedented things at Auburn. He has had multiple jobs that many people have had before him, and some jobs that people have had since him. And you could reasonably argue nobody's ever done those jobs as well as has done those jobs. I don't think there's any doubt he has Hall of Fame credentials. We're just talking about if he wins a national championship, where does he ultimately land on an all-time greats list? And it's going to be pretty high. He has had an incredible career, as you know, one that was interrupted by NCAA violations that seem like nothing now, but were a big deal then. But he bounced back, took a Auburn job that has been historically difficult for almost everybody. He's the first person to ever take them to the Final Four, and he's got them clear-cut the number one team in the country right now. Last thing on this before we move on. On Sunday's episode of the Eye on College Basketball podcast, I was just sort of wondering aloud, like how many times the National Player of the Year and National Coach of the Year have come from the same school in the same season, because Bruce Pearl and Johni Broome have an opportunity to bring that to Auburn right now. In fact, I think you could reasonably argue Bruce Pearl is currently the leading candidate for National Coach of the Year. Johni Broome, leading candidate for National Player of the Year. So let's, I've done the research. Let's call it a trivia time. And I don't know if trivia times work great on television. I guess we'll find out together. Trivia time. The Naismith Coach of the Year award didn't even start until 1987. So begin your thought process there. Dating back to the 1987 season, how many times have a coach and a player from the same team won the Naismith Awards?
Okay, so just so we're clear, we're only, because there are 6, or really CBS Sports does as well. So there are 7 major National Player of the Year awards, but you want to specifically narrow this only to the Naismith Award.
Yes, because that is the easiest thing to look up, and I don't know how much time you think I got on my hands these days.
Well, no, it's fine. I didn't know. So you didn't want to dive into the 60s with the AP award. I got it. I'm just making sure that was the case.
Just answer the question that I asked you.
Can I? How many times has it happened? I'll say 3.
You were wrong. It's happened 8 times. 8 times since 1987 have a coach and a player both won the Naismith Award from the same campus. In order, 1988, Larry Brown and Danny Manning. 1989, Danny Ferry and Mike Krzyzewski. 1992, Christian Laettner and Mike Krzyzewski. 1996, Marcus Camby and John Calipari. 1998, Anton Jameson, Bill Guthridge. 1999, Elton Brand and Mike Krzyzewski. 2004, Jameer Nelson, Phil Martelli. And the last time it happened, 2020, Obi Toppin and Anthony Grant. Go on the record right now. Do Bruce Pearl and Johni Broome join that list in March, early April, and make it the ninth combo to ever win the Naismith Awards, coach and player from the same campus in the same year?
I'm going to go on record. I'm going to say it happens. I'm going to say Pearl. So specifically with the Naismith, I'll say Pearl. Broome wins the Naismith Player of the Year, and then Pearl is National Coach of the Year, and he gets 1/3 of the way up to
Duke.
almost Coach K 3 times. How about that?
Yeah.
Good on him.
That's why some people call K the GOAT. He consistently recruited the best players in the country and won a lot with them. National championships, Coach of the Year awards, and his players have benefited as well. I think I'm with you. There seems to be an not anti-Cooper Flagg sentiment developing, but Johni Broome is doing this against the SEC, and Cooper Flagg is only doing this against the ACC sentiment that is developing, and that could, theoretically at least, be the thing that pushes Johni Broome past Cooper Flagg in the National Player of the Year race. And then, of course, there are competitors for Bruce Pearl as well in the Coach of the Year race. I think at this point, most notably, Rick Pitino at St. John's. But right now, if I were turning in a ballot, I do think it would say Bruce Pearl and Johni Broome. They've got a chance to join that list of 8 previous Naismith Award winners, player, Coach of the Years from the same campus. When we come back, we're going to touch on a couple of interesting results from Monday night. Duke had no issues at Virginia because these days almost nobody has issues with Virginia. Arizona won at Baylor. We're going to talk both games next. This is the Eye on College Basketball Podcast. We're on CBS Sports Network. Welcome back to the Eye on College Basketball Podcast on CBS Sports Network. Let's take a few minutes to focus on a couple of notable results from Monday night. We'll start with the one in the ACC. Final score, Duke 80, Virginia 62. So the Blue Devils are now 23-3 overall, 15-1 in the ACC. I know Clemson is just one game back in the loss column of the ACC standings, but Norlander, you don't think anybody's taking this ACC title from Duke, do you? Jon Scheyer is going to be an ACC champion in, March. That's you assume that's true, right?
Yeah. Actually, there's not much to take from the game, which is kind of the problem here. Monday was really slow on the schedule, and that's been a function of a couple things. Conference realignment. The Big Ten plays every single night except Mondays during the conference season, so there's no Big Ten games. Tuesdays have been phenomenal, and tonight again will be really, really good. But unfortunately, it leaves this opening on Mondays where Big Monday, for all intents and purposes, no longer exists, and you can't even get the ACC and Duke to salvage it. This game was barely watchable. Duke was in a runaway. The biggest news from it is that Malik Brown separated his shoulder. He's Duke's rangiest, most switchable, and the staff has even told me the most valuable defender they have is Malik Brown. I actually think having him versus not is the difference between Duke winning a national championship and taking 6 in the big bracket versus not. I think that what he brings defensively means that much, and hopefully he'll be back on track to be able to be healthy in March, but we wait and see on that. But from the game, GP, it was just the latest. I have the numbers right here. And you mentioned in the previous segment about Broome getting more credit for going up against tougher teams, which I think, frankly, that he should, because this is Duke's. Now, they've got the loss against Clemson, and that was a loss on the road, and it was a notable result. Clemson's a really good team. But other than that, I actually think it's doing a little bit of a disservice to how great Duke is, and drawing just a little bit away of wanting to watch Flagg because he's not getting resistance. Here are the margin of victories, most recent to the start of ACC play, GP, not including the Clemson loss. 18, 36, 21, 29, 17, 10, 7, 25, 35, 8, 29, 27, 23, 26, and 11. So great job by Jon Scheyer, that team, that staff. They're doing what they set out to do. This is a 23-3 team that has a case to be the most talented and as dangerous as anyone in the country. But the ACC has let Duke down. I think it's actually affecting a little bit of Cooper Flagg's overall reach when he's still the most famous player in the sport, don't get me wrong. But as I was watching this game last night, Tony Bennett was there. The camera caught him in the stand sitting. It was just a major bummer. I remember going to a Duke at Virginia game that involves Zion Williamson and was a massive, massive deal. And for many, many years, Virginia was the program in the ACC that acted as the foil to Duke even more than Carolina in some seasons. And now that's all gone, and the ACC in general is just... It's a little bit of a downer, and I'll tell you what, I'll be at the Garden on Saturday, and Illinois, don't get me wrong, it's been turbulent, but at least maybe Duke getting out of this league for a weekend to go and face an Illinois team will give them the kind of resistance and challenge that they haven't had, and frankly, I think they need.
I have for more than a decade on most Mondays during the season flown to New York and sat in a hotel room exactly like this and taken in Big Monday. That's my Mondays, Big Monday. And I used to look forward to it. And now I look forward to whatever Big 12 we have game we have on Big Monday because the ACC just doesn't provide enough compelling matchups. And you're exactly right. Duke is, I don't want to say taking a hit because of it, because Duke is 23-3, 15-1 in the league, a projected 1 seed in the NCAA tournament. But it would be more interesting, and I think a better watch if we more consistently had Duke in ranked versus ranked matchups, where both teams we're watching have numbers beside their names. And we don't get that with Duke too often these days. And it's not, John Scheyer can be frustrated by it, but it's not his job to recruit for the rest of the league, to roster build for the rest of the league. And you look around and some of its proudest programs, biggest programs are just really struggling relative to what they've been or what they should be. Miami was in the Final Four a few years ago. And now 2-12 in the league. NC State was in the Final Four less than a year ago, 3-11 in the league. Syracuse is one of your biggest brands for decades, 5-10 in the league. Virginia, is 100th at BartTorvik.com. This is a team that under Tony Bennett was consistently winning ACC championships and competing for national championships. Actually won one, and they're 6-9 in the league right now. Florida State was good for years under Leonard Hamilton. Not anymore. North Carolina, down relative to all normal expectations. And so, you add all that up, and that's how you get a bad league. They've got to get that fixed. And I do think they're on the right track to getting it fixed, if only because, Louisville has a competent coach now. That's better than it's been there. But still, the league is down, and it's not because people like you and I are picking on it. It's because that too many programs that should be good aren't. And that's why you watched Duke play another boring game last night. I'll just put it like this. Once upon a time, not too long ago, if you won a game at Virginia by double digits, that was a huge deal. Duke won last night, won by 18, no issues whatsoever. Congratulations on your cute little quad 2 victory. That's all it was.
Yeah, that's brutal. And these things are connected, by the way. I talked with Scheyer on the recruiting trail, I think 2 years ago, when the ACC wasn't even this. The reason why Duke and Illinois are going to play on Saturday at the Garden is, one, both coaches did want to play each other. Brad Underwood and John Scheyer. John Scheyer has been ambitious in ways that Krzyzewski was not for the final couple decades of his career. But getting the game in February and the work that had to be done with both leagues to, hey, we need the weekend to not play our league compatriots here because we want to play each other. Good on the ACC and the Big Ten for allowing that to happen. But this is happening because Scheyer knew that he was going to have to up his non-conference scheduling ambitions in order to protect against the bottom. At the time, the bottom quarter of the ACC, it is now more than the bottom half. I mean, the ACC, I think, has reached the point where it has as many sub-100 teams at KenPom as it has top 100 teams, which is a disaster for any high major conference. So, the ACC continues to, unfortunately, be a really, really brutal situation. And I think it's pulling a little bit of the compelling in nature away from Duke, whereas if it, as you said, ranked, unranked, or even shy of that, the fifth or sixth team in the conference clearly being projected to make the tournament. That's not even the case now. So it goes. We'll see if Duke gets a real challenge when it steps outside of league play into a different rhythm, a different beat against the Illini. Let's go to the other game, which was much better in a better league. Arizona coming off of back-to-back losses, GP. They go into Baylor. They get the win. Your thoughts on the game, your biggest takeaways, what did it mean?
Listen, Arizona has been good, and losing a game to Houston, it looks like most people are going to do that this season. So I was never alarmed. I just think the big picture last night was an opportunity to continue a good story, to keep you in this conference race, and they go to Waco and they get that done. As you know, but in case people watching don't, Arizona started 4-5. They're 4-5 on the season through 9 games. Now 14-3 since then to reach 18-8 overall, 12-3 in the Big Ten. And I mentioned, an opportunity to continue chasing a conference championship. Houston's not going to lose much, so you might not catch them even if you win out. But this at least keeps you in that range, and also in the range to finish top 2 in the conference. And maybe Tommy Lloyd couldn't care at all about this, but it is something I've noticed. He's been a Division I head coach for 3 years now, and he has finished top 2 in his conference all 3 years. It was obviously the Pac-12. Now he's in the Big 12, but there was a point in this season, let's just call it through 9 games, where it looked like there's no chance that streak's continuing. But right now, Arizona is alone in second in the Big 12 standings with a 12-3 record, and they might not catch Houston, but they do have a chance to finish top 2.
They do. I thought it was an important development for Arizona just to and Tommy had said something after the game, after the loss to Houston, which was, impressive as ever in vintage Houston over the weekend. How are they going to respond? He actually, hearing him say that over the weekend, I was getting flashbacks to when I went out to Arizona against when they hosted Duke back in November, and I had a chance to sit down with Tommy the day before the game, and he got into a lot of his expectations and philosophies, making the jump to the Big 12, toughening up his team, his program, getting ready for these battles. And the Big 12 hasn't been the best league in the country like it's been. It's third overall in the net and at KenPom. But I thought getting the win and holding on late, like Baylor made a little bit of a push there, but ultimately you get a good performance out of Henry Visar, who jumped into the starting lineup, and you can see his impact immediately. I thought that was key, playing alongside Toby Awaka, who finishes with 14 and 12 in this one. They didn't need Caleb Love, and they haven't needed him to have outstanding games in order to win games. They're going to need it at times, but they didn't need it here necessarily. I thought that was a good development for an Arizona team that is, if not on the list of true teams that can win a national championship, if it's not there, it's in that next bucket of teams right after it. I thought that was key. On Baylor, GP, I wanted to bring this up to you. So they're 16 and 10. They've dealt with injuries the entire season. I can't remember if I mentioned on the show. I know I wrote it in the court report a couple of weeks ago. I had spoken to Scott Drew briefly in the past couple of weeks, and when I spoke to him, I think it was either that day or the day before, he was in a joyous mood because Baylor had just practiced with every available player for the first time in the entire regular season. And then lo and behold, the very next game, they lose a key big. And so they never will again the rest of the season. They have been, if not ravaged by injuries, certainly hampered. And this is a 16 and 10 team and not safely in the tournament. Going to have opportunities like at Colorado, at Cincinnati are the next 2 and 3 of the next 4 on the road, but they're all beatable teams against non-tournament teams. So you're in a spot where if you get the wins, they're going to be road wins. They're not going to be easy, but man, losing them would really damage you. Keep an eye on Baylor, and attached to that, GP. You know who Baylor lost to start the season? Gonzaga.
Gonzaga. Yeah, by a billion.
And what's weird, GP, is those two programs, they've been intertwined in many ways. They met in the 21 title game. Scott and Mark subsequently tried to schedule a game the ensuing season, and then that got canceled due to COVID. But they're really, really close friends, and playing each other means something. I'm almost positive they will open again next season. They're gonna play next season. I think they're scheduled to play that on the first night of the season again. It's a great thing. But Baylor's now 16 and 10. And those were two teams that we thought would be top 15 level at the start of the season. Well, Baylor's what? 10 seed, 11 seed. Gonzaga right now, not much better. Gonzaga's best win is Baylor, and Baylor's not that good. And if you don't want to say it's Baylor, okay, it's at San Diego State. That's a bubble team. Just interesting to see how those teams, in ways we didn't expect. This is why college hoops is awesome, because there are developments every single season that we can't see coming. No one thought we would get to the second and third week of February and we would be looking at Baylor and Gonzaga as not surefire tournament teams. But although I think both are going to get there, that is the status of both of those programs right now, Parrish. Neither of them are guaranteed to make the dance, and these are two of the 5 or 6 most high-performing, consistent programs over the past 6 seasons in college hoops.
Yeah, for 8 straight games, basically 4 straight weeks, Baylor has been alternating wins and losses. So they're one of those unique teams that kind of stays off of our radar. I've talked about this in the past. We talk about the things that are really good or the things that are really bad. And if you're in the middle, you're not that interesting as a topic of conversation. And Baylor's just been that kind of good enough to not really have us too worried about them missing the NCAA tournament after being ranked in the preseason, but not quite good enough to be an actual part of the national conversation. VJ Edgecombe has been up and down. He's the 5-star prospect, projected top 5 pick. But ever since that opening night, when we walked away from that going, we really did have a moment where you had to wonder, is Baylor the best team in the country given what we just watched? And now we know a lot more about Baylor, a lot more about Gonzaga, and the answer is that first impression we got from the Bears is a misleading one. When we come back, we'll stay in the Big 12. We'll focus on the Kansas Jayhawks because for the second consecutive season, KU has gone from preseason number 1 to disappointing. Should this concern Jayhawks fans? I'm going to ask Norlander that next. It's the Eye on College Basketball podcast. We're on CBS Sports Network. Welcome back to the Eye on College Basketball podcast on CBS Sports Network. Let's talk Kansas, because for the second consecutive year, Bill Self's Jayhawks have gone from preseason number one to disappointing. And by disappointing, I don't mean, oh no, they're going to miss the NCAA tournament, because that is not going to happen. Kansas made it last season. Kansas should make it again this season. But clearly things have not gone well. Norlander, if you were a KU fan, would you be concerned, not just with how this season has unfolded, but with the fact, and it is a fact, that the two worst years in Bill Self's entire run at KU happened to be the past 2 years that we've just watched after he won a national championship the year prior?
To a certain extent, yes. I've mentioned this on the show, but I'm going to mention it again because it's an insane stat. So Kansas is all but fated now to do something as a program that hasn't happened in more than 40 years, and that is finish in consecutive seasons outside the top three of the Big 12 or its conference standings. You got to go back even to the Big 8 era when that was the case. And not only that, but Kansas fans had gotten accustomed to their team winning the regular season most seasons, and if not, finishing second. Like, there's not even, over the past 4 decades, there hasn't been even the occasional season where it was like, or a run where it was like, oh, they were first, second, then they were fifth, then they were second. They were 1 or 2 every single year. So this is, if you're a Chiefs and Jayhawks fan right now, maybe a mild identity crisis. I mean, your football team's still plenty great, but you're coming off of a very weird performance by the current best player in the sport, having one of his worst games ever, and now you turn to hoop season and a Jayhawks program that you're used to getting into the big bracket with either a 1 or a 2 or every so often a 3 next to its name. Well, for a second consecutive season, it's not going to be that. In fact, Self's program is really trajecting toward its worst seed ever under Self, and I think there's room for some caution. But I do think that when you look to next season, when there's going to be a roster reboot, Darren Peterson is coming into that program, and there is a chance that even in a year where the Boozer twins will go and play for Duke and AJ DeBance is going to be at BYU, and there's going to be an influx of really awesome freshmen, and we'll have more amazing juniors and seniors to talk about, Darren Peterson could be among the 5 or 6 most entertaining, watchable players in the country. I mean, Bill Self has called him, if not the most talented, one of the most talented players he's ever recruited to Kansas. Need I remind you, this guy brought in Andrew Wiggins and Joel Embiid to the roster in the same season. So, to your question, Parrish, if we are near this point a year from now, and we are talking about a Kansas team that isn't projected to finish first, second, or third in the Big 12, and isn't looking like it's going to be a 1, 2, or 3 seed, then I think we've got to have some larger conversations. But for now, you kind of, if you're a Kansas fan, I think you just sit in it, hope that Self can find a way to do what he's done so often and be, one of the very best coaches ever in college basketball, work its way to the Sweet 16 and see what happens. We both follow Evan Miyakawa's work a lot. He's got a great site right up there with your Torviks and your Ken Palms. And Evan put out a video earlier this week that basically laid out the data and said, here's why I'm actually buying on Kansas. A lot of people are selling right now, understandably so. But if you really dive into the statistical profile, they've actually got a pretty good, healthy chance, not knowing where they'll be seated, of winning a couple games in the tournament. So concern, caution, yes, but not full-blown panic.
You and I have both discussed Kansas a lot on the podcast this season, I guess every season, given the amount of success that program's had and its place in the sport. And so I think consistently we've said it's Bill Self, it's Kansas, they'll be fine. Maybe not what we thought, but they're fine. It's still Bill Self, it's still KU. And I got a text message from somebody I respect who works in the sport, and it more or less said, hey, I hear you, and you're probably right, but don't ever forget, this is how it happens. This is how it happens. Coaches are great, and then, they age, and then they're not the same anymore. And, John Calipari was great at Kentucky. Unless you're Rick Pitino, of course, that goes without saying. And honestly, Mike Krzyzewski was pretty great all the way through the end of it. Yeah. Roy Williams was pretty consistently great all the way through the end of it, although Roy actually reached a point where he didn't think he could do the job anymore. But
they were bumpy at the end too. If you go back and look, they had it down to sure. Yeah.
I guess the point this person made was, I agree with you. It is still Bill Self, but if it starts to go the wrong way, Bill Self is not going to be the first all-time great coach who watched it slip away just a little bit. How would you respond to that text message?
I would say, well, why don't you forward it to me? Let me know who sent it to you, and I'll forward it to you. We'll do a three-way FaceTime and really hash this out. But not knowing who sent it, I would say Self's track record is so aberrational to the rest of almost every other coach that while this could be in play, and I brought up on our recent pod, it's, I don't think these things are necessarily connected, but this guy was unable to coach in the tournament just a couple of years ago because he needed a heart procedure. And for, anyone to go through that, like, it's a significant life event. I'm open to the possibility that maybe the absolute best days are behind, but I am not willing to go there yet because he really is that good. He is that great. That again, I just want to see one more year. It's all too easy for me to envision 12 months from now, Kansas is a top 5 team in the country. They've got it back, and it's like, this is Bill Self. So I'm more on that than your messenger sent.
I am too, and I just thought it was interesting that somebody was willing to go there. But I'm still in a place where it's Bill Self. The track record speaks for itself. It's not like either of these past two teams have been bad. They just haven't been as good as what they usually are and what we thought they would be. But neither team has been bad. And yeah, you can point out that he is 62 years old, but 62 years old is still relatively young in coaching. Bruce Pearl's 64. Mike Krzyzewski coached into his 70s. So it is much easier for me to believe Bill Self is headed back to another Final Four someday than it is to believe his actual best years are behind him. But it is undeniable that, the past 2 years have been disappointing relative to expectations. And, Kansas fans have at least taken notice of that. When we come back, we'll move on to the Big Ten, where Michigan has taken sole possession of first place in the conference standings. Dusty May trying to get involved in this Coach of the Year conversation in year one in Ann Arbor. We'll talk Wolverines next. It's the Eye on College Basketball podcast. We're on CBS Sports Network. Welcome back to the Eye on College Basketball podcast on CBS Sports Network. Norlander, I know you are boarding a flight tomorrow morning. You're going to Detroit and then taking a car to Ann Arbor. You're going to be at Michigan for the rest of the week, and that means you're going to be spending time with Dusty May, who's in his first year in Ann Arbor and doing okay. First place in the Big Ten, a part of the National Coach of the Year conversation for the second time in a 3-year span. What do you make of what Dusty's been able to do at Michigan in his first season?
It's been impressive. Not surprising for your boy. I did have Michigan preseason top 20. If anything, they're a little bit better than I even expected. They lead the Big Ten, but not just because of Dusty May. Frankly, it was I really, really liked the portal haul that Michigan brought in. And we go back to the preseason. Remember, we were like, who's going to win the Big Ten? Like, we look at there's 8 teams that are on the board here, and it's kind of playing out that way right now. Michigan has a 1-game lead in the Big Ten standings. This is by far the best high major race that is out there. I mean, it's frankly, it's not even really that close at this point. Go to the Big 12, the Big East, the SEC, the ACC. Like, those leagues are all essentially spoken for at this point, with teams with 2-game leads, if not more, in the conference. Meantime, in the Big Ten, right behind Michigan is Michigan State and Purdue and Wisconsin, 2 games behind the loss column. Maryland, UCLA, also really, really good. I think Michigan's got a really good chance at winning the league, because 4 of its final 6 games in the regular season, if you didn't check GP, they're at the Chrysler Center, which I will be there Friday night for the big Michigan State-Michigan matchup. I'm looking forward to it. Haven't been in that building. And that result might go a long way to helping determine who gets the 1 seed and the 2 seed in the Big Ten tournament. But, May's been just a huge hire right off the bat immediately. And as I wrote earlier this season, I think we ran this in might have been the first or second week of January in the court report. Danny Wolf and Vlad Golden are both 7-footers. Golden is technically listed 7'1", Wolf is 7 feet. And there isn't a team. Wisconsin is close, but really no team uses its 7-footers together on the floor within their offense the way that Michigan does in the entire sport, and it makes them a matchup problem. Wolf has been able to really upgrade his defense. There are other reasons as well. Like, I just think Roddy Gale and Amari Burnett are just smooth, solid wing options. Trey Donaldson can really get downhill, and he's been a really boost out of the portal. He was, interestingly enough, he was at Auburn just a year ago. Yeah, rave reviews here. I think Michigan is a viable Final Four contender. And as a reminder, this program won 8 games last season under Juwan Howard, and this is now the biggest year-over-year win flip in Michigan program history.
Yeah, in part because of the quality of the team, in part because of the remaining schedule. For whatever it's worth, KenPom is currently projecting Michigan to not only win the Big Ten, but to win it outright and by multiple games. So that appears where we're headed. As always, we'll see. As you know, Dusty was the 2023 CBS Sports National Coach of the Year after taking Florida Atlantic to the Final Four. So he's got a chance. I don't want to speak out of both sides of my mouth. We both established that Bruce Pearl seems to be the leader for National Coach of the Year. If not Bruce Pearl, it might be Rick Pitino at St. John's. But Dusty May can get on the ballot now. And I wonder if you subscribe to this, and then real quickly we'll move on. But one of the points I've been making whenever I get asked to talk about this stuff is the coaching carousel, in my mind at least, has been so simplified by where the sport is right now. You used to have to care about things about, well, does this coach candidate have relationships that make geographical sense to my campus? Has he ever recruited at my level? All types of things you had to consider. I really do think it boils down to 2 things now. Can my guy coach? And can I give him NIL resources? Because if you hire a good basketball coach, just a guy who can coach, and you give him the resources to roster build, that's all you need. I don't want to say nothing else matters, but very little else matters. What we are watching right now at Louisville, at Kentucky, and yes, at Michigan, all 3 programs went out and hired people that if you ask other folks in the industry, they hired people who they would say, that's a good basketball coach. That guy can really coach basketball. And then they gave them the resources to roster build, and now all 3 programs are rock solid, headed to the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, great point on that. And there's a couple more, too, that have been able to bring in a coach right away and really flip the situation in ways, to your point on the way the carousel used to work. It's not that coaches couldn't get high major jobs and immediately flip it. It just, with the small sample size in this NIL era, it feels like it's happening more frequently. And I'd argue that's a good thing. In fact, Kelsey even told me, I'm going to paraphrase him because I don't have the quote in front of me. He had brought this very thing up to me when I talked to him in January, where if he had gotten the job in another era, 10 years ago, 12 years ago, he would have expected, and the fan base probably would have expected, okay, give it 2, 3, 4 years, got to get it going, got to get my recruiting class in. And now it's like he had people coming up to him that were kind of like of that mind. He's like, yeah, no, this is gonna be right now. Like, there's no reason why we can't and be able to do this right now. That's his mentality, and obviously Dusty's wired similarly. So with that, you give fan bases hope every single season. And then my last point of this, and we can wrap GP. The other end of this, though, is that because this becomes the nature of what's happening in college basketball, other coaches in not great spots, it might give them even less slack to be able to make up for this and get that bonus year, and can create more turbulence, turmoil in the carousel. Because when you see other people doing it that fast, say, why can't that be us?
Yeah. No, if I heard a coach at his introductory press conference talking about, I got a 4-year plan, I would be really concerned.
What have I done?
Plan. You don't need a 4-year plan anymore. This can be flipped overnight. It happened at Louisville, happened at Kentucky, happening at Michigan too. When we come back, turn our attention to tonight's schedule. We'll tell you what to look forward to. We got a triple header on CBS Sports Network. This is the Eye on College Basketball Podcast. Be back in a second. Welcome back to the Eye on College Basketball Podcast on CBS Sports Network. Before we get out of here, let's look ahead to Tuesday night's schedule. We got a triple header on CBS Sports Network. I'll be in studio all night, 7 Eastern, Loyola Chicago at Davidson, followed by Seton Hall at Marquette. Fresno State at San Diego State will wrap up the night. That tips a little after 11 Eastern. Then we'll have a 30-minute episode of Inside College Basketball. Let's focus on Marquette. Golden Eagles still ranked, still good, but they have lost 3 of their past 4 games. Concerned at all?
Actually, no. Mark me down for Marquette to be a team that I think, you know how we love to sort the data. This is, I'll predict that, let's say by the start of the Big East tournament, from the start of the Big East tournament. So we'll say February 18th to whenever the start of March 13th, March 12th or whatever. I'll say Marquette will be a top 10 team at barttorvik.com when we sort the data. Then I just have a hunch that this program, which has been good in recent seasons, to getting to that 2 line, to playing well deep into March, I think they're going to be okay. They've got home Seton Hall, then they're at Nova, home Providence, at Georgetown for the next 4. Give me Marquette going 4-0 in that stretch, and then the final 2 are at UConn, home to St. John's. Maybe they split that. They weren't in the top 16 of the bracket reveal on Saturday. I do think on Selection Sunday, Marquette will be a 4 seed.
Yeah, they should be favored in 5 of their next 6 games, closing out the regular season. So should pick up a little momentum, at least theoretically, heading into the Big East tournament. Elsewhere on Tuesday night, some notable games: Purdue at Michigan State, Texas A&M at Mississippi State, Illinois at Wisconsin. What else stands out to you?
What else is the Kansas BYU game we mentioned earlier on the show? Just got to keep eyes on that because BYU is just narrowly into the field right now, I'd say. And man, you get a tournament team on your home floor. Take advantage of that opportunity and give yourself a little bit of space there. BYU can afford to lose the game and make up ground, but that's a big one for another. We talk about first-year coaches being able to change their situations. Obviously, Kevin Young's been able to do that. Houston, Arizona State isn't overly compelling, but this is my pitch. I did talk to Kelvin Samson yesterday. The Cougars, Kelvin Samson, will lead Wednesday's court report at cbssports.com and on your CBS Sports app. That'll probably publish sometime in the afternoon. I took a look at Kelvin Samson and how great he's been since he left Indiana in 2008. And it's mostly about Kelvin Samson. But if you're curious about how those two parties have veered off different paths since that fateful day in February of 2008, that will lead Wednesday's court report. Oklahoma, Florida is also one I'm just keeping an eye on because Oklahoma is running out of breathing room to be in the tournament. That's a very tough ask. So the Sooners going into the O-Dome, you would think that Florida will win and win with some ease, but how much fight will Oklahoma have in that kind of game? Of the ones you mentioned, obviously Purdue, Michigan State, super compelling. It's been just a really tough stretch here for Tom Izzo. They got the win on the road, got the 354 for him personally to be the all-time Big Ten wins leader, and now Purdue coming off the home loss against Wisconsin. I think that's just an awesome matchup that will matter for seeding in the Big Ten tournament, and maybe just a key data point on whether those teams wind up with a 2, 3, 4, or 5 next to their name on Selection Sunday.
Yeah, Houston heavy favorite, obviously. So we'll see whether the game's compelling, but the story is super compelling, as you know. Kelvin Samson has won 5 conference championships in the past 6 years, and the only time he didn't, he still had the best team in the league. It was just unbalanced schedules because of COVID cancellations. Then he moves to the Big 12, wins it by 2 games last season, and he's got a 2-game lead in the Big 12 right now. In other words, you can factually say this about Kelvin Samson. He has, for the past 7 years, regardless of conference, had the best team in his conference. Who else can you say that about? Not many. There were times when people... Mark Few maybe, but I don't even think that's true because St. Mary's has won a conference championship in the past 7 years. So it might be a group of one, Kelvin Samson only. And I know there was a time, particularly with the way it ended at Indiana, that people questioned whether he was a future Hall of Famer. That should not be a question anymore. He should be in the Naismith Memorial Hall of Fame someday. Let's get out of here. Shouts to Devin Downey. Shouts to Chester, South Carolina. Shouts to Terry Teagle. He's a legend. Huck Larnell. Thank you guys once again for watching the Eye on College Basketball Podcast. If you're not subscribed, please go subscribe anywhere you get podcasts, and we'll be back on CBS Sports Network same time next week. Till then, take care.